Lloyd Lobo is one of the first people I reached out to get on here.
As a 9-year-old, 8 or 9-year-old, traveling as a refugee of the Gulf War. And so throughout my journeys from childhood, I won't call that hardships because it really didn't feel like hardships. Built Boast and other companies, there's just a lot of struggle. My dad worked a lot.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of the CEO Mastermind podcast. I've been looking forward to this podcast for quite a while. Lloyd Lobo is one of the first people I reached out to get on here, probably sometime earlier this year. And between busy schedules, here we are finally connecting. So he has an incredible story. The amount of topics that he can talk about, we can be here for 3 days, but we all know that that's not what we're going to do here today. We're going to focus on a couple areas in specific. Today's topic will be about the 8 to 10 lessons, 11 lessons that he's learned from bootstrapping from 0 to 11 million, past 10 million, sorry. And his story is one of inspiration, one of authenticity, one of humility, and one just so filled with lessons. He'll talk about it a little bit later towards the end of the podcast. He has a new book launch coming, so I'd encourage everyone to get behind him, sharing that story. But he is a very successful entrepreneur, has not had an easy road like most entrepreneurs, has an incredible builder of community experience. Get this, a lot of times people, they come from, pretty okay places and they don't believe they can do it. But he was, a refugee as part of the Kuwait War, the Gulf War that happened in Kuwait. We all know that in the early 90s. It talk about a journey, and I'm going to ask Lloyd to kind of go through that a little bit. So why don't we do that? Lloyd, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, the story you've had, the things you've been through, and then we'll get right into the 11 lessons, bootstrapping to 10 plus million.
Definitely. I mean, I never thought about it that way as a journey of hardships because I was always surrounded by great people. And one key lesson, I think, on that journey as a 9-year-old, 8 or 9-year-old, traveling as a refugee of the Gulf War from Kuwait to Baghdad to Jordan on a rickety bus on the highway of death, where like you weren't sure if you're going to live or die. There were no phones. As I looked around the bus and saw the faces of the adults, the one thing was common. They were all laughing and singing and playing the guitar. And I realized that day that it's neither the destination nor the journey, but the companions that matter the most, right? You could be on a crappy journey on the way to hell, but great companions make it memorable. And so throughout my journeys from childhood to now, I won't call that hardships because it really didn't feel like hardships. And, I was fortunate. My parents, my mom stayed at home to look after the kids, me and my sister. My dad worked a lot. I don't think we had, within their means, they gave us everything we could. There was a lot of struggle as we built Boast and other companies. There's just a lot of struggle as a part of course, being an immigrant and trying to reach and punch above your weight class. But I wouldn't, I think it never felt like hardships. And as I reflect back, it never felt like hardships because I was always surrounded by great companions. So, even dating back before the Gulf War, my parents, my mom was born and raised in the slums of Mumbai, which they made a movie on it. And as a child, as my mom and dad grew up, they moved to Kuwait to work, as most people do back in the day. India and Asian countries, they used to go to the Middle East before they decided to go to like the West. And so every summer we'd go visit the grandparents, and they lived in a slum where they had like, I think like cement blocks or like some just very raw cemented 4 walls and a foil tin, aluminum roof. And my mom had 9 siblings, and every time I'd go there, it was a very community vibe, right? Like it was the monsoons, it would rain a lot. it wouldn't be puddles, it would be ponds, and we'd all be swimming together with people I'd meet there. And even watching TV was very communal, in the sense a couple of homes had TVs, and we would all coop up in those little shacks, and the people who couldn't come in would watch from the railings outside. And that was life that I experienced, watching, like, not living there directly, but visiting every summer and seeing my grandparents. And every time I'd go there, Mumbai is like the New York City of India. I'd see some stranger there and I'd ask them, like, why do you have this stranger in the house when you barely have place for your 10 kids? And I'd always hear that the only way to create abundance in life is to help others without expecting anything in return. Then the Gulf War happened many, many years later. And that was actually my first experience with really entrepreneurship in a way, because what is entrepreneurship? You have an idea that you're going to take to execution and fruition and impact while dealing with extreme uncertainty. So this is the Gulf War. Security had lapsed. You weren't sure what was going to happen. There was no cell phones. There was no internet. And I went down the building with my dad, and we looked around, and there were other concerned faces. And immediately they started organizing. Okay, I'm going to guard the building from this time to this time, and I'm going to organize food supplies. And like every building in Kuwait became a sub-community, and from building to building, the word of mouth spread, connected with embassies, connected with governments. And I think one of the biggest grassroots movements to evacuate the people to safety. And so that was the second experience. Then moved to Canada a number of years later after that. And after engineering, I only ever worked at a number of startups. I studied software engineering at Lakehead and Thunder Bay. And before I was graduating, I asked an entrepreneur, back then they were called businessmen, traditional business guy, hey, what's the best skill I could learn if I wanted to go into business? And I was told that sales. And so the first, I applied to a number of sales jobs, and nobody would hire me because, like, you're an engineer, why do you want to go in sales? Or you're probably an awkward engineer. People dismiss me right away. So I begged my way into cold calling at a small company. And then from there, my journey started. And I would just, on my drive in my spare time, read like books about selling, listen to audiobooks, and then go and implement it. And then from there, from cold calling, I moved my way up to selling. And then I joined a startup. My wife now, my girlfriend then, was in med school in the US. So I got a job at a small startup. And I think there are 10, 12 people. And I took a job in selling. But really what it was go sell customers and figure out what to build, then tell us what to build, and then also like market it. So I'm like, wow, this is like do everything, do a little bit of everything. But I never complained. My first cold calling job, I was getting paid less than 30,000, like about 33,000. And then this job in the States, I was getting paid like 50,000. It was nothing. And I still remember I was staying in an attic paying like $400 rent, but I soaked in all the experience, because I'm like, what better experience to be an entrepreneur someday than to go from site to site and talk to customers in a consulted way to figure out their pain points and then distill down what you need to build and work with the engineering team on what exactly to build. And then you actually go and market it. So that was my next experience actually with community, because this was, I think, 2005 or 6. And I started searching about like new ways to market, because everything was offline marketing and I wanted to get an edge.
Yeah.
And all the stuff I found about new ways to market was from HubSpot's inbound marketing community. They had a HubSpot's inbound marketing certificate. And I went through all the courses, SEO, SEM, social. I learned it all. And that's when I first came across Gary Vee as well. he was running the Vino or Wine TV, and he ran a hour-long course or 2-hour-long course on HubSpot's inbound marketing certificate on how to create video content. Like he was doing this in 2005 or 6, man. Like people say, oh, he's so famous right now, but it's just, a lot of what success is compound interest and consistency. He was doing it from like 2004 or 5, right? That's like looking at a channel and betting on it that it's going to be a big one, and it played out well for him. He was this chubby little guy, and so I learned all of that, and I launched the YouTube channel for the company, and I built the website for the company, and I did SEO, and I got us press. I learned all these new age marketing tactics, and so although I was an engineer, I got sucked into sort of GTM and product. And then my journey started going through and through, right? Like one is I always craved the risk, which I guess I got attached to as a function of the Gulf War experience. And I always craved connection and community, which dates back to me going and hanging out in the slums of India with my grandparents and then the Gulf War. And so the community has been a very constant in my life. So moved to the States, leveraged the HubSpot community to learn everything about GTM and marketing, worked at a number of startups. Then eventually my best friend from university called me and he said, let's do a company together. He was in the research and development R&D tax credit space. Like globally, hundreds of millions of dollars are given in tax credits to fund businesses, but it's a broken application process. It's prone to frustrating audits, and it takes a long time to get the money. So he hit me up and he said, hey, I think we should do something. And I'm like, jumped at the opportunity to work with him. I was just jumping around from startup to startup anyway, like, in the sense like no major founder equity, but I was just learning, right? And so I was moving to San Francisco. I was in San Francisco. Alex was in Calgary at the time. And I said, I'll just come and hang out with you. And moved to Calgary, and we started cold calling people to buy our stuff, right? We had no product, nothing. We were selling R&D, like as a consulting services, getting you money from shred programs and government incentive programs. And we were cold calling and nobody would take our calls. And so, it was very, very hard to close them, because think about what you're saying. You're saying, hey, give us your technical data and your financial data, and we'll get you money from the government faster, better, cheaper than Big Four accounting firms. Why would they trust you, right? Mm-hmm. And so, it was hard getting in front of bigger companies, and we were more and more relegated to talking to very small companies. So we said, hey, what's the best way to build social proof and an audience? The one thing we knew, that we had a network of our own, having been in our entrepreneurial circles, and we knew we had access to other founders. We're like, as people who've been a part of failed companies, failed startups, we would love to get advice from successful people on exactly how they did it. And this was a time where podcasting wasn't really prevalent that much. Nobody was sharing tactical business content on how I got from X to Y. Conferences were all like platitudes from CEOs. They weren't like helpful to like a founder just getting off the ground. And we started going to more and more events around Calgary, and we found the same thing: platitudes from CEOs, and no tactical advice. And we understood and honed in on our ICP. Now, we could have picked any number of ICPs, but what we did was we focused on the startup ICP, and we bet that it's going to be, the startup segment is just going to explode over time as software is leading the world. And a lot of people made fun of us and said, why are you going after startups? These startups are going to fail and you're going to be out of business someday. But a lot of success comes from just picking a contrarian view and being right. Because if you are just doing what everyone else is doing, then you're also probably going to see similar results. And so we bet on that startup space. And today, if you look at it, almost every company, accounting, law firm, everyone wants to support startups, right? Everyone has startup programs and
Everybody.
all of this. But back then nobody did. And so what we started doing was we went to startup weekends, hackathons. We genuinely participated in the community to understand the pain point. Now, we were that same ideal customer profile. So we knew our pain points and we validated that others had the same as us. Is, we want to learn tactically how to grow our business, make connections, and so on. So we started hosting meetups with tactical advice. How do I get my first customers? How do I make my first hires? How do I raise funding? Like very, very tactical advice. And we started inviting people to these pizza nights. And, the first one, 10 people showed up, and then like 15, 20 people showed up. And then one day we had 200 people show up in the co-working space. And when 200 people showed up, the guys who run the co-working space were like, listen, this is not a pizza night meetup anymore. This is a full-blown conference. Over time, that evolved from pizza nights into the Traction community. We partnered with a good friend, Ray Walia, who runs a nonprofit called Launch Academy in Vancouver, and we had a good partnership, and we started growing that community together. And today, Traction is like 120,000 or so subscribers, and we've hosted 100 plus events, including webinars, in-person meetups, dinners, and then large conferences. And every major CEO from Twilio to Zoho to Uber has been to our events. But what was really interesting is there's a key learning there. Everyone focuses on the solution that they're selling. If you only focus on the customer's problem and aspiration and think about what drives them the outcome, you'll provide them value beyond your product or service. And when you fall in love with your customer and provide them value beyond your product or service, you start to build stronger connections and true community that transcends any transactional relationship. And so as we build this community, we also, I brought our first several clients, and then we hired salespeople, and they embodied that community-focused DNA, which wasn't like picking the phone and just cold calling them, but really going out and shaking hands and kissing babies and really bring that broker of resources, understanding like, hey, you have a pain point. How can I help you? What can I connect you with? And as a function of being the good people and getting the social proof of all the speakers and the partners we invite at these community events, we started to get more and more and more and more clients. And that's how the company sort of grew at a high level. And so, not too long ago, we sold a majority stake in the company, transitioned out of the day-to-day operations. And as I sat and reflected back on the journey with all my free time, traveling and whatnot, there were like very profound moments in my life where the community has been the focal point, the anchor point, right? Like basically just from my childhood, inspired by the profound impact of community. Like I said, experiencing the camaraderie of the people in the slums of Mumbai when I would visit my grandparents, or being rescued by a grassroots movement during the Gulf War, or bootstrapping Boast to 10 million ARR with zero marketing spend and no marketing team by building this Traction community to 120,000 subscribers and hundreds of events. And so after I left the day-to-day operations of the company, after selling majority, me and my co-founder sold majority, I ended up actually depressed because I was the face of the company. Although I was on the board and I had financial freedom, I didn't know what to do. And I felt I lost my identity. I got depressed. And then one fine day, my wife's like, listen, if something happens to you, your family's going to be left holding the bag. I know you're depressed, but the glass is half full and you're in a position to do anything. And what had happened was, before that, me leaving the company and after the exit, I actually Like after we sold a majority stake of the company, I actually had a very bad bout with COVID. I almost probably have died, was hospitalized for
Oh
COVID.
wow.
I had bilateral COVID pneumonia. And so my wife's like, listen, you had a rough year, COVID pneumonia, left the day-to-day of the company. And now you're just like drinking and being insufferable because you left the company and you feel like you lost your identity. She's like, the glass is half full. And if something happens to you, your kids, like who are 9, 5, and 2, are going to be the most miserable. They were at the time, they were 7, 3.5, and not even 1, a few months. And so I thought very deeply that night, and I looked across the room, and I had the Peloton bike that we've had for a number of years that I turned into a makeshift towel rack. So I hop on this Peloton bike, switch it on, and I feel an instant connection with the instructor, because she was coming off maternity leave and didn't feel as strong. And she said, I haven't ridden in a while. I don't feel as strong. I don't want to do this. And then she yells out, self-pity is toxic. One crank, one shift, one rider on the block. I can, with Eye of the Tiger from Rocky playing. And I felt I felt instantly connected to her. And the riders were high-fiving each other. And that one ride just flew by, turned into 2, turned into 5, turned into weekly streaks. And, so for the, I don't know, like the several time, the community saved me. But these were some key profound moments, right? Like the slums, the Gulf War, the HubSpot inbound community helping me learn everything about marketing and shaping my career, to bootstrapping Boast with the traction community, and then finally being sailed away to good health and fitness after being depressed and overweight with the Peloton community. So I said, I'm sitting on a lot of free time and I want to educate the world and pay homage to communities. And so I set out on this journey to write a book on community-led growth because I had a lot of free time. And so I talked to maybe 1,000 leaders. I rewatched 7 years of Traction Conference content. I actually joined several communities as a member to just experience what it's like to be in those communities firsthand. And then I researched and talked to people from more than 100 community-led businesses like Atlassian and Duolingo and Mass Company, all these companies. And what I realized was there were very common learnings, which basically led me to 13 common learnings or rules to build iconic brands with community-led growth. And so I titled the book From Grassroots to Greatness, which is 13 rules that I found that were common to all these businesses that leverage the power of community to start, grow, monetize, and change the world. And some my lessons in there, and a lot of the big brand lessons from their grassroots days. And so that's really a very long-winded introduction of my journey from from childhood to today.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible introduction, riddled with so many learnings. I think you could touch on a couple of things in there that I think it's important highlighting is the power and resiliency of the human spirit, right? Because you can be under non-ideal condition, but yet you can find happiness, and happiness is not found in cars or the actual house, but it's found in what's inside, right? What's inside between our 2 ears and how we communicate with our friends and our family. Like you said, you guys were in an uncertain situation, yet the adults were looking around and laughing. And I think that's when you have, even for myself, there are some, similarities, different experiences, but where I've been has been all about community. So I love that aspect because it's the power of human spirit. It's the power of connection, having people with common ground. You can uplift each other. I mean, even to your point, you were saved by Peloton. I've risen up in the corporate world, and it has, certainly we have our own abilities and smarts and whatnot, but so many mentors and friends and different, entrepreneurial and business circles. It really is about the people that you're with and the importance. And sometimes the world speaks in mysterious ways to make you go that way. To your point, you had a moment, your wife nudged you, you hop on the Peloton, then everything kind of changes around, all by the power of community, the power of Spear, right? And it's the power of her mindset, that instructed that you had. So hopefully that inspires a lot of people, because it's so I love what you said, because it's so true, but sometimes people forget about it. But that self-pity is toxic. And it's something that's really easy to fall into, particularly in the Western world, because you get distracted by all these other things that sometimes don't matter, rather than focusing on what do you love to do and what do you love to have, right? I don't know who said it, but the path to like fulfillment, or slash riches, but really I prefer to use the word fulfillment, is because money doesn't make you happy, but it's about doing things you love for the people that you want to help. And I think there's no greater joy than being able to help someone else, whether it's a fitness journey, a business journey, or whatever it might be. So that's incredible. You talked about a
Definitely.
couple.
Money is only good if you leverage it to buy yourself freedom. All my life, I chased success looking for happiness. And when the society's definition of success came, I ended up depressed and overweight. And then I realized, what is success? The ability to do what you want, where you want, with whom you want, when you want, on your time, in your prime,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
and what that is freedom, effectively. If you can create 3-4 hours, just start by creating 3-4 hours of free time in your day, you'll already start to feel better, right? Because
It's
we do a lot of in this society, Western world, we do a lot of work about work, right? We deliberately put ourselves in situations where we live far from work, so you got to commute. We deliberately put ourselves in situations where you can't walk around, where the walkability is less, and then working long hours, eating crappy diets, and then we put ourselves in situations, and you can say that we can't do anything about it, but sometimes you can, right? You can compromise
uh,
on the size of the house for the walkability or whatever. But the point I'm trying to make is there is this study done on the blue zones, the 5 cities that where people live till they're 100.
100, greatest percentage, 100 plus. Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
Yeah,
go on, love it.
functionally live to that. And there are 9 common traits. And 3 or 4, I think 4 of those common traits are all related in some way or shape or form to community, like belonging
Yeah,
to a community, like a church, or like walking together, eating together, working out, socializing. So there's that element there, right? And
yeah.
and I think our world puts it in there. But if you had, for example, changed your environment in such a way that now you have the ability to socialize more, I think you'd be happier.
I 100% agree. I can't take credit for this quote. I believe it was Alex Hermosi. It's a pretty simple statement, at least who I heard it from. Money only solves money problems. And to your point, the reason to live long based on for example, the blue zone, money wasn't on that list, right?
Yeah.
It was all about social. It was about community. It's about being near places that you can work and be at one with nature. Like, we're sort of
Yeah.
designed not to be in jungles. Like when I was talking to Kasha on a previous podcast, our human genome hasn't changed in 200,000 years. We are designed to be together, not in isolated concrete jungles. And we're isolated to sing together, to be outside, look at the stars, do those sorts of things. In your opening piece, you talked about a few different things that you can pull out and say, what would be the number one superpower you can develop as a founder? Now, there's a whole bunch of tips that you put in there. Obviously, studying go-to-market, consistency, being studious, being great at sales, building a community. Any one of those, we could make a persuasive argument about being a superpower. But in your belief, um, What is your number one superpower message to the world?
Definitely. So I think the one skill that is most important is the ability to sell. And I'm not saying sell in a scammy car salesy way, but the ability to communicate and evangelize your vision, mission is critical. Your job as a leader is to clearly articulate the vision of your company to inspire, excite, and motivate people. Because people who are inspired, excited, and motivated can move mountains. It's not a one and done activity. And so, what is the
Yeah,
best route to get there to the ability? Because the thing is, a lot of us want to get good at something, but they don't want to do anything about it, right? You
yeah,
won't get good at something unless you keep doing it. And you're going to be really bad at it in the beginning. You're going to keep being bad at it and bad at it. But if you keep doing it, you keep doing it, you keep doing it, eventually you'll get better. What role forces you to keep communicating more than anything else? It's sales.
yeah,
Sales helps you polish your messaging on the fly, right? It helps you pivot strategically in sort of difficult situations. It helps you evangelize people because effectively, as you grow as an entrepreneur, everything you do is evangelizing people, convincing investors, convincing media, convincing your spouse to help to let you do startup after startup, having given you failed over and over again working for startups that didn't go anywhere. Even like convincing your developers on what to build because they have different ideas. It's all evangelism, right? Media
yeah,
relations. And so it's a very, very important skill, the ability to sell, because you can say you want to have influence. The ability to sell is the ability to communicate and articulate effectively to inspire and excite and energize and motivate people. And that same skill can be used in different environments. We often say, oh, create content and build influence, build community. But if you can't communicate, you won't have an audience or a community. You'll just have an empty room.
yeah,
Right. And so I think that is the one
yeah,
superpower. If you'd go and do one thing only, um, read the best books go to maybe Amazon and look at the top rated books on like selling and the top rated books on communication. I think there's like my favorite ones are Spin Selling by Neil Rackham, which I've used a lot at the learnings, and Made to Stick and How to Win Friends and Influence People, and
that's a
Influence
great
by
one.
yeah,
Yeah,
and Influenced by Robert Cialdini. Read those four things and then put them into action. The thing is, you know, communication is always secondary. It's not a huge part of your job when you're doing desk jobs. The only way you're going to put yourself in a situation where you're forced to communicate hundreds of times a day, hundreds maybe an exaggeration, but tens of times a day is in sales. And so that's what I did. I graduated and took a job in sales, and I think everything I have is because of that one skill, ability to communicate and evangelize. So I would totally explore doing that if you don't have that skill. And if one of the founders don't have that skill, it's going to be hard to get a company off the ground.
yeah, it's going to be. I love that you said that, because I agree. Sometimes sales has this thing that you have to sell someone. To
Yeah.
my view, is along what you said. Sell isn't about selling. It's about creating. I have a solution and have a need, of making sure that there's a proper support system. So you create a community, you create a relationship that everybody wins. I mean, if you sell someone something they don't want, ultimately it just leads to friction. It leads to animosity. And like you said in the book on how to win friends and influence people, is after any one of us have an engagement, we want to be able to return back to that person. I mean, that was the single biggest takeaway one of the biggest takeaways I had from that book was essentially after you've been in a room or after you've had a conversation with, let's say, a prospect or a founder or whatnot, you want them to feel that they want to come back and engage with you. And I think that's how you create that human connection, create and bond over that emotion through something that you have a common sharing for and a common goal. This really super successful entrepreneur in Canada, he said, when you have a common vision, a common need, and a common trust is how you build great relationships. And I think that's what sales is about. If you do have something that you're selling, or a solution that you provide, that you make sure that you're serving the right people and you're chasing the solution and the impact of your solution, rather than, oh, this is just another high ticket sale. I just sold someone $50,000 SaaS package. I mean, that's extremely fleeting, right? I don't think that's how companies fail, right? Is to take a very transactional, short-term approach to how they build relationship through sales. Right? I think it's finding those true deep connection points.
Definitely. And I think, once you can do that, the rest of the things you can learn and figure out, because this is one of the hardest things to learn, right? To build, to influence people through communication and with empathy, communicating with empathy, and understanding and speaking in terms of them and helping them and communicating. Like basically, communication is the rails for everything that happens in a company. Companies that cannot communicate, it erodes, right? Like you've got a foundational layer, and that is communication. If you cannot communicate in a company, whether it's written or verbally, then you're just going to be at loggerheads, right? Like even like finding alignment. A lot of it is communication. Communication is the rails that drives companies. It's the rails that drives cultures. It's the rails that drives communities and the world in general.
Yeah, 100%. I just think what you said is so eloquent and spot on. It's something I know and understand and internalize, but the way what you just said is put in such a simple, powerful, and descriptive way that communication is the rails for everything to happen. That is so true. That is exactly how marriages break down. It is exactly how friction happens at work. So actually, when you start thinking, I'm starting to think about that a little bit on the spot and going through all my experience over the last 20 plus years, every breakdown has been related to that, right? Someone's inability to properly communicate or have taken a transactional approach. I just love what you said. I'm going to have to give you some royalty every time I use that quote now. So Lloyd said this. I'm going to send you
You can use the quote, Alan, as you please. My only request is I have the book coming out from grassroots-to-greatness.com, 13 rules to build iconic brands with community-led growth. I've put the book for sale for 99 cents, and just buy the book if you like it. Review it on Amazon. That's the only royalty I'll need, but otherwise none. And once you figure it out, because think about it, what is the foundation for a great company or a great community in general, or any great marriage, relationship, whatever? Great companies are built on great alignment. If you don't have alignment going in, everything will break down. So like, what is the purpose? Like, why do we exist? Why are we in this? What is the vision? What will the world look like as a function of us being? What is the mission? How do we do this? And what are the values? How do we behave? Like finding alignment on that is key, right? The second thing is then once you have that alignment, it's very important that the things that you align on are not lip service anymore, right? Culture is the leading indicator of growth, and value behavior match is the number one driver of culture. Employees and people observe your actions. They don't look at your lips or what's written on the wall. So if behaviors don't match values and there's no consistency in how you implement values, like for example, hiring and firing and promotions are not aligned with values, then your culture is going to erode. In the early days of Boast, we had a sales guy who was doing really well, but super toxic, And we're a bootstrap company, man. He was doing a lot in revenue, and we made the hard decision. My co-founder Alex is like, listen, we can't have him, and we made the hard decision to let him go. And it took a year for us to recover from him leaving, but we built
Did
a
the right
bigger
thing to do.
company. Right. Culture is the leading indicator of growth. If you think about it this way, while communications is like the thing that makes is the rails that makes everything move, but you're still leveraging communication to inspire and motivate people. People build companies, right? They
Absolutely.
need the rails to make things happen, but people ultimately are the orchestrators, right? And if you treat your people with love and help them grow, they'll treat your business with love, and your business will grow. The job of a leader is to build, inspire, and motivate a team to deliver. Deliver is the lagging indicator in that equation. So we talked about communicate. The other one is like, you hire and promote people on tenure versus trajectory. I truly believe this, if you keep hiring people based on tenure versus trajectory, you will become the very thing you set out to disrupt, right? And so this is saying that you shouldn't just recognize and promote individuals who come with X experience, because they may or may not be set in their ways, but if you got to find people who show great potential and demonstrate to drive the company forward, right? Like, I'm a big believer in doers versus talkers. Trajectory, like candidates with like a trajectory of growth and potential impact. So not for the experience, but for their potential. Because sometimes what happens is people come with a lot of experience and they're set in their ways and they can't see the future. With a startup, what you're doing is not the best way to build a successful company, in my view, right, is not improving yesterday's technology for today, but trying to imagine the future and build it today. Build tomorrow's today, not incremental improvements on yesterday, but build the 10x, improve, imagine the future and build it today. And that is the 10x, right? If you're just improving yesterday, a lot of the times it just becomes incremental. The other one is, you're 24/7, you're burning out, and your employees also observe that if you're 24/7, then they feel obligated to respond on evenings and weekends. See, how you take care of yourself is how you show up. Prioritize physical health, practice mindfulness, build a system of support system of peers, see a therapist, set intentional boundaries for personal time. I think that is really, really important. And because if you do that to yourself, you'll do that by your employees and your team, and they'll feel happy, because everyone has a personal life. Life in business is a marathon, not a sprint. And if you sprint a marathon, you die. So if you don't take care of yourself personally, you will not be able to take care of the business or your family. The other one is like, learn something new, right? Like, it improves your brains. It doesn't have to be work related. You can learn to play music or learn to dance, and it just keeps your brains flowing. Something, right? So like invest in a hobby that's outside of work and get passionate about it. And then perform acts of service of kindness, right? The joy of giving is second to none. So I think these are more of the emotional sides of the business that you need to have in place. The 5 I said, right, which were, to recap, it was values, right? Adhere to your values. Your values shouldn't be lip service. Alignment around vision, mission, purpose, and then communication being key. Hire on trajectory versus tenure. Don't be 24/7. And some of the other ones are, you need to have a singular ICP when starting out, ideal customer profile. Because if you try to, when you're really, really new and you're not narrow, I find if you have no resources, it's better to be an inch wide and a mile deep. You start narrow and you expand from there. Otherwise, if you try to please everyone, otherwise you please everyone, it becomes like you're pleasing no one. Then you don't have a good sort of retention, right? So here's the thing. If you have people coming and not leaving, you can build a great business. If people are leaving, even if it's a few percent, like let's say you have 20% churn every year, that means you got to get a new user base every 5 years, right? And
Yeah.
so, in many ways, if you don't have a singular ICP, but more importantly, you don't have retention, like high retention, it becomes very hard to invest in growth because you're just taking money and throwing in the fire. The next one is if you exactly. Next one is if you have a singular ICP when you're starting out and you have good retention and engagement in the product, then you need to figure out a good go-to-market motion. And that could be anything. It could be, now I'm a big fan of sales and community building, but there's partnerships and there is SEO and SEM and Google Ads and community building and any number of things, right? Just whatever it is, make sure you understand your ideal customer profile very clearly. You figure out their needs, aspirations, goals, where they eat, breathe, drink, sleep, and be present where they are. The worst thing is, not knowing how many people you're going to reach, where to reach them, and then you're just like spraying and praying. So figure out a good GTM motion. It has to align with where your community and your customers hang out. Number 9 on that list is you chase shiny objects. Like as founders, you get distracted. Oh, this big deal, that other deal. Doesn't matter. What matters is you got one kind of customer coming through one kind of channel, getting one kind of value, right? The phases of a startup are, phase 1 is validation. You have an idea for a B2B product. You got to get 10 customers to pay you to try it out. You're not optimizing for website or marketing or anything else. You're optimizing for message market fit. Is the message resonating? Basically, they have a problem. They trusted you to deliver a solution that'll solve it and they'll pay you for it. The next one is product market fit, which is now you've expanded the cohort maybe from 10 to 50, and these people keep using your product. Engagement is a leading indicator of product market fit, and retention is the lagging indicator. Don't just say, oh, they're not retained. If somebody has signed up for your product, but they haven't onboarded, then you have a problem. Even though they paid for an annual contract, if they haven't gone through the onboarding, they're going to cancel a year later.
Doesn't matter.
Make sure they onboarded and they engaged. Engagement, if people are not completing the core action of your product, meaning if they didn't do this product, then you may as well not have a product. Then you have worries. So make sure people are completing the core action of your product. And if they're engaged and they're using it, then they will definitely be retained users, right? Or customers. And so don't chase shiny objects. Don't chase the next big thing that could come by. One customer who gets one value, who comes through one channel. Number 10 is you don't have urgency. Urgency is the currency of high growth startups, period.
Yeah.
You got to ship things fast. You got to execute fast. Create a sense of urgency. Number 11, and I'll share a few more, is you don't show up consistently. The job of a founder is to make sure the company vision proliferates, the culture is on track, communication is not breaking down, you're recruiting the best people, you're evangelizing the company to the media and investors, a bunch of things you're doing. And you're the go-to person when all the dramas happen, right? So if you don't show up consistently, take your evenings, like work out, build a social circle, meditate, do all those things, like I said earlier, in terms of bullet 5, right? Is, go out for dates with your partner. Like basically find joy in your life. If you don't find joy in your personal life, you will not only burn out, you'll hate your job too. So make sure of that. You're doing that. Sure. And that's why I said, if you do that, it'll be easier to show up consistently because you have to day in, day out, reinforce the vision, the culture, communicate to all stakeholders. You got to recruit the best people. You got to talk to investors and update them. You got to do media relationships. You update employees, and then drama happens inevitably, and you got to be the go-to person when that drama happens. And so with so many things on your head as a founder, how do you make sure things are on track? It's by taking care of yourself, right? If you don't take care of yourself, you can't play the long game.
Everything else. I always say energy is contagious. So if you're exuding positive energy, guess what? The rotten apple spoils the bunch, but so does the happy one, right? So if you're around negative, to your point, don't have the diversity to find that joy in multiple parts of your life, that energy will translate your entire life. Like, and to your point earlier, it includes what you show up, how you show up to work, right? People see it,
Exactly.
people feel it.
Exactly. How you take care of yourself is how you show up. The other thing, especially in a startup, at least up to 10 million, maybe more, you're obsessed about big company logos. It doesn't always translate, right? When you're in a startup, you need to do things with your hand. Like I learned to do SEO, SEM, video, LinkedIn posting, building websites. Like usually when you hire people from large corporations in a small startup, what I've found is that it becomes hard for them because usually they're executing with a team. So keep in mind, whoever you're hiring, they can leverage their hands, right? More doers, less talkers. And I feel the jack of all, like you don't need specialists. You need somebody who's in a startup. Ideas pivot all the time, right? Ideas will pivot, solutions will change. And so the most important thing then is, can you adapt? Your adaptability, ability to deal with ambiguity and risk. And so that is extremely important. And usually we find that larger companies execs are better once the company is more stable, right? Say 15, 20 million or so in revenue, and you have a repeatable, scalable channel, and you need somebody to scale the business. But until then, you can have a jack of all trades that will work really good for you. And then the
And have,
last
like you
one,
said, had that iterative mindset, right? Because you're constantly evolving, adapting, pivoting, ultimately to better serve your customer, right? So if you're
exactly.
optimizing your solution to be the best in the market or the only in the market, then that is the way to your point, to make sure you don't have a leaky bucket syndrome. Because I believe, to your point, if you're not doing that and you're having a leaky bucket syndrome, you're spending a lot of energy just to stay the same rather than growing and growing more predictably and scaling with less friction.
Pain is the precondition for growth. When you put yourself through a little pain, there's two kinds of pains, right? So the biggest BS trope is growing pains, because there's two kinds. Growing pains as a function of taking on hard things helps you grow because you learn and you solve challenges. Growing pain as a function of like stupidity or ego actually wears you down and makes you old. One makes you strong and move fast, and the other burns you out. And then the last one I find is like, it's important to look at the leading indicators, right, of the business. So the leading indicators are, is there, as a business, there's only 3-4 things that matter ultimately. Are customers happy? Are employees happy? And is there money in the bank, right? And so what are the leading indicators of those? Engagement is the leading indicator of retention. Traffic, leads, traffic leads is the leading indicator of growth. If you don't have any traffic and leads are not coming in from whatever it is, companies
are in trouble pretty quick.
Yeah, if customers are not engaged in the product, which you can log and see, retention is going to be pretty low, both on the employee front and the customer front. If you're going to slave drive employees, your ENPS score is going to be low. But why wait for the NPS? Just watch the pulse in your company by walking the halls, right?
Yeah.
And so if you do these things, I think you'll have cash. I think you'll have cash in the bank no problem if you focus on those things.
Yeah, I love what you said about NPS. I think it's not something that's really used a lot. NPS is probably one of the best score you can use, but I tend to use it as a dipstick, right? So you got to dipstick it, see the NPS score, what your customers, what your people are saying. But I love what you said, because you do need to walk the halls. You do need to talk to your team. You need to observe what your customers are doing, because you can't send an NPS survey every day, every hour. You do it once a month and you get a pulse on, are we going in the right direction? Are we getting the right feedback? But every day and every moment in between, it's important that people are looking at what's happening and how is it happening. So I think that's great. I think that's a great observation.
Definitely. Awesome, man. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for hosting me. And
Thank you.
my book's going to be available for purchase on fromgrassrootstogreatness.com. Get a copy. If you like it, leave me a review. And you can add me on LinkedIn, or if my LinkedIn connections are maxed, then follow me. It's LLOYED Lobo, Lloyd Lobo. It's pronounced Lloyd, but my mom threw an E in there. And I asked her growing up, everyone butchers my name and makes fun of me. Why did you throw an E in there? And she'd always tell me growing up that, if you ever want to be an entrepreneur someday, which I hope and dream you will, businessman, as they would say, you won't be able to trademark a traditional name called Lloyd, but you would be able to if I threw an E in there. So that was her willing that into
I have the
existence.
same thing with my name. There's an E at the end of it, although it's an Italian spelling, so it's Davide, but in English it's silent. So people, same thing to your point, that your geniusness comes from your mom there, clearly. Because, when I was earlier in my career, I would never go by Davide. It would always be Dave. Anyone who's known me for the last 10 years know me as Davide. You had anyone before that knows me as Dave. And but my one old boss, he said, "You're a marketer." I was working at Kraft. This was 15 years ago, and he said, "Embrace your name. It's what makes you different, right? Like, how many people have an E at the end of David in Ontario, Canada? Yes, there's lots of Italian population, but not many with this name." So we share the extra E in common, and really appreciate your time. I know at this point it's almost 1 a.m. for you. Appreciate you scheduling this with us today. We'll put all your information in the show notes and a link to purchase your book. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise and your lessons with us. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll have to do another one in the future because I still have 3 pages of questions. So we have a long relationship to nurture. So thank you for everything you do and sharing and launching to the world with your new book. Excited to read it.
Thanks, Davide, and have a wonderful rest of the day. I'm gonna crash. It's 1:30 almost, but thank you so much, man. Take care. Love and peace, brother.
Take care. Love and peace. God bless.